glasses. Arlene and I have been working with comparing these paradigms, and it's not a clean comparison all the time, because all of us are working in environments that you'll see all three paradigms going at once. And oftentimes they're all three going at once within us. We have been brought up in a modernist worldview. We've been brought up to trust science. And yet we're also asking some of the same questions that those who are practicing the new paradigm are asking. And as Christians, we should be. But how do we see that fleshing out when it comes particularly to health? We've been working on a book on the theology of nursing, and my job was to write the chapter on health. And I was just beating my brain. I had all the theory that I wanted to put into it. But I thought, how can I say this in a way that really communicates where the rubber meets the road in patient care? And about that time, the doorbell rang. And my friend Susan stood on my doorstep, a glowing picture of health. Her eyes flashed with enthusiasm for life, and a deep sense of joy radiated from her face. But a large mass on her neck betrayed another force at work in her body. Susan was on her way home from radiation therapy for a rapidly growing thyroid cancer. But she had never felt more alive, and she wanted to tell me about it. Susan also wanted to tell me how much her relationship with God and the friendship within the congregation, friendships she had developed within our church congregation had meant to her, and how great a difference that gave her in her perspective on her illness. She knew she was dying, but she was at peace. She was ready to meet God, and she knew that her husband Joe would not be left alone. People in the church would continue to care for him. Susan's view of the church had not always been quite this positive. As a young woman, Susan and Joe were active church members. They'd raised their kids in the church. She taught Sunday school, and essentially she was a strong Christian. But as her kids got older and moved away from home, they also moved away from church. And then her daughter wanted to get married, and she came home and went to the pastor of their church and asked him to marry her and her husband, her fiancé, and he refused. And it embittered Susan so much that she withdrew from the church for about 20 years. And Joe eventually did as well. However, Joe passed our church every day on the way to the golf course, every Sunday on the way to the golf course. And every time he just felt this twinge that maybe he should come in and see what was going on there. This was a different church from the one they had belonged to 20 years before. Eventually, Joe did come in. He joined my Sunday school class, which was kind of fun. He was the only man in a class of 18 women, mostly in their from 60 to 90. But he was delightful. And we began to love Joe. And in the meantime, Joe told us about Susan and her bitterness toward the church, and we began to pray for Susan. Their lives began to crumble in every other way except faith, Joe's faith anyway at this point. A son-in-law was killed in a tragic accident. He was working at the airport and was on the runway, and a truck just came along and ran him down and killed him. Susan's brother died of a thyroid cancer. He was diagnosed, and 6 weeks later he was dead. And it was at this point that she also discovered she had thyroid cancer. So we were praying for her. People in the church were visiting her. She would come to social events, but she didn't come to church because she just didn't feel like she should. She'd been away too long. She felt guilty about it. But eventually she did. And she found her place in that congregation. She reestablished her relationship with the Lord. And it was through these last months of her life that she really came into health, even as she was dying. Throughout all these crises, the church ministered to Susan through notes, visits, flowers, and prayers. And as her illness progressed, she became homebound. Now, I serve as a parish nurse coordinator in my congregation, and I would visit Susan. And especially as she was homebound, I would visit her and just talk with her, help her to put her faith into perspective, to talk about what was going on with her body. We figured out how that she could still take her pain medication and not be constipated and things like that. So she had stopped taking the pain medication because of that. So in some ways I was dealing with her physical needs, but for the most part, I was praying for her and with her, listening to her, giving her hugs, and just being community with her. And the church was joining with me. I was not the only one visiting. She had lots of people visiting her. She died right before Christmas, but her funeral was a celebration of life and faith, and a testimony to the health that God offers to us in Shalom. Now, what is health? I'm equating Shalom and health to some extent, but the popular media portray health as youthful appearance, hard muscles, sleek bodies, clear skin, cavity-free teeth. The nursing literature, on the other hand, is moving in a very different direction. Health, according to nursing theorist Margaret Newman, is expanding consciousness. According to Rosemary Parsi, it is essentially synonymous with becoming, which is an open, rhythmically co-constituting process of the human universe interrelationship. I've put that up here so I won't have to repeat it. One nursing text summarizes the current definitions of health. As a dynamic process, it's something determined subjectively and objectively. Health is a goal. Health is being able to take care of yourself. Health is optimal functioning in body, mind, and spirit. Health is integrity of self. It's a sense of wholeness. It's coping adaptively. Health is a subjective experience. It's growing and becoming. And finally, health is a broad concept. According to current nursing literature, health is indeed a broad concept, so broad, in fact, that it ceases to be an adequate goal for nursing. Margaret Newman even states that health encompasses conditions that heretofore were described as illness, or in medical terms, pathology. For the most part, contemporary nursing definitions of health focus primarily on a state of mind. That's important because it's determining the shape of the nursing of the future. It negates the care of the body. On the other hand, the World Health Organization idealistically defined health in 1946 as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. That's the definition most of us have grown up with in nursing. However, this definition, according to medical ethicist Daniel Callahan, set the stage for a conception of health that literally encompasses every element of human happiness, and it's impossible to reach. Now, I've said that Susan radiated health despite her tumor. She obviously did not meet the WHO standards. On what basis could I say that Susan was healthy? What is the difference between that understanding of health and Margaret Newman's? Susan demonstrated health in her attitudes and relationships, but the tumor itself was not encompassed in her health. It remained a very serious pathology. However, if we view the person as an integrated whole, created to live in harmony with God, self, others, and the environment, then health means being able to function as God created us to be. It involves reconciliation with God and others, forgiving and accepting forgiveness, loving and being loved, finding meaning and purpose in life, leading to a sense of joy and hope, as well as freedom from physical ailments. We've heard some of that already in the presentations. Health, to some extent, is culturally understood. Nursing theorist Madeline Leininger has been one of the key proponents of understanding health culturally. And she explains our rapidly growing multicultural world makes it imperative that nurses understand different cultures to work and function effectively with people having different values, beliefs, and ideas about nursing, health, caring, wellness, illness, death, and disabilities. She sees human caring as the heart of nursing and a universal phenomenon. She states, health refers to a state of well-being that is culturally defined, valued, and practiced, and which reflects the ability of individuals or groups to perform their daily roles and activities in culturally expressed, beneficial, and patterned lifeways. Hence, according to Leininger, nurses must draw their goals for nursing from the persons or groups in their care. That's also important because, as we're seeing, the persons and groups in our care are demanding things that may not be consistent with the biblical worldview and with our personal commitment to Jesus Christ. Biblical anthropologists Bruce Molina and Richard Warbaugh attempt to uncover the cultural understanding of health found in the time of Jesus. They stress that in ancient Mediterranean cultures, a person's state of being was more important than their ability to act or function. They state illness was not so much a biomedical matter as a social one. It is attributed to social, not physical causes. Because sin is a breach of interpersonal relationship, sin and sickness go together. Illness is not so much a medical matter as a matter of deviance from the cultural norms and values. And in this case, it would have been the cultural norms and values of the Bible. Shalom. Hence, they view Jesus' healings primarily as restoring the person to the worshiping community. And we see this. If you look at the healing accounts in the Gospels, that's what you see. That Jesus healed people to bring them back into the worshiping community. Missionary physician Tony Atkins describes the African view of health in a similar way, as a function of community. He explains it is an indigenous concept that acceptance within and harmony with family and society are important elements in healing and preserving the health of people. He compares the African view to the biblical understanding of health and concludes, for the Jew, as for many people in tribal societies today, health was essentially a positive quality that derived from the fact that people existed in total harmony with the world and in harmony with God. The biblical understanding of health is closely related to the concept of shalom. Often translated as peace, shalom actually incorporates all the elements that go into making a God-centered community. Peace, prosperity, rest, safety, security, justice, happiness, health, welfare, and wholeness are all encompassed in shalom. Christian philosopher Nicholas Waltersdorf defines shalom as the human being dwelling at peace in all his relationships, with God, with self, with fellows, and with nature. The New Jerusalem, described in Revelation 21, verses 2 through 4, illustrates the meaning of shalom, and this is what we heard read last night. And I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "See, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them as their God. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things have passed away." Like the WHO definition, the concept of shalom is too broad to be the goal of nursing. But it provides a perspective through which we can understand and frame our concept of health. Linked to the biblical understanding of the person, shalom points us to how healthy persons function. It includes the physical, psychosocial, and spiritual dimensions of the person. Theologian Paul Tillich illuminates the idea of dimensions by saying that the person should not be considered as a composite of several levels, such as body, soul, and spirit, but as a multidimensional unity. And that's the biblical, the Hebrew mindset did not divide things into little boxes like the Greeks did. And that's the way of thinking that we've really inherited from our modernist culture, that, well, this is the body, and this is the soul, and this is the spirit. And this is what a lot of the new paradigm theorists are reacting against, because we know that's not true. We're not separated. We know that what affects the body also affects the mind and the spirit, and the other way around. The interrelationship between health and salvation in the New Testament is striking. When a group of men brought their paralyzed friend to Jesus, he responded by saying to the sick man, "Your sins are forgiven." Then he went on to heal him physically. There seems to be a relationship between the man's need for forgiveness and his illness. In another situation, when a woman with chronic vaginal bleeding touched the hem of Jesus' garment, he replied to her, "Your faith has made you well," implying a relationship between faith and healing. Note, it doesn't say this is always the case, because there are other cases when that wasn't necessarily so. The Greek word zozo, used here and elsewhere for healing, is translated in other passages as salvation. When Jesus cleansed the 10 lepers, only one returned to thank him. Jesus told that man, "Your faith has made you well," zozo. All 10 were cleansed of their leprosy, interestingly, but only the one who returned found complete healing, and that was intimately wrapped up in his relationship with God. The whole point of Jesus' healing was to restore people to a fuller, richer relationship with God and to the believing community. Theologian Jürgen Moltmann explains, healing consists of the restoration of disrupted community and the sharing and communication of life. Jesus heals the sick by restoring their fellowship with God. Theologian Thomas Regi expands this idea. Since wholeness is more than physical well-being, the healings of Jesus also affected changes in the meanings and values of those whom he encountered. Jesus consistently called people to repentance. He invited people to turn away from those things that brought division and disintegration into their lives, and to become responsible for their own health as well as the health of others. Such a definition goes far beyond the scope of nursing, but it also reveals something of our relationship to other members of the healthcare team and to the Christian community. Because we are multidimensional beings in need of holistic healing, we are also a multidimensional healing community. Nursing encompasses only one dimension of healthcare. However, the role of the nurse does not necessarily lie alongside medicine and pastoral care, but in many ways it is within both. We see this, nurses on the mission field have for years gone beyond the boundaries of nursing that our Nurse Practice Acts define in the United States. They've diagnosed and treated and even done surgery. And physicians have done the same, where Christian physicians have seen the need for nursing care and there are no nurses there to do it, they pitch in and do it. Sometimes that even happens here, not very often. Healing requires functioning harmoniously within those communities and within partnership with God. Functioning under such definitions leads to some fuzzy distinctions, which will only become fuzzier under managed care. But it acknowledges what we already know and reduces the spirit of competition. There will be times when nursing stretches to include practicing medicine. Nurses in developing countries and physicians have also always gone beyond those bounds. Today's advanced practice rules also push hard into the once ironclad bounds of medicine. In a similar way, nursing borders on entering into the role of clergy, even to the point of organizing through religious orders or parish nurses and deacon nurses serving on church ministerial staff. That's not a new movement. The deacon nurses in Scandinavia and in Germany have been going on for over 100 years. In fact, that's where Florence Nightingale learned it all, was from the deaconesses in Kaiserswerth, Germany. Rather than fight turf battles, we need to recognize that the pursuit of health must remain multidimensional and interdisciplinary. Just when we think we have the lines drawn right, they're going to shift again. And we're seeing that in a much more rapid pace with managed care. What then are the implications of this multidimensional understanding of health for nursing? Florence Nightingale understood nursing as taking personal charge of the health of others. If we are to take charge of it, we need to know what it is. Theologian Karl Barth defined health simply as the power to be as man exercised, the power to be as man, exercised in the powers of the vital functions of the soul and body. And we'll excuse him for his exclusive language because he was in another generation. In other words, it is to be all that God has created us to be. Missionary physician Daniel Fountain cautions, health cannot be defined. It is not simply an object for analysis. To render it such is to think secularly about health. Health is life, a gift we receive, an endowment we are to develop, and a journey we are to pursue. We can observe and analyze much along the way. We can manipulate and improve certain aspects of health and life, but we can never comprehend the whole. While it may be true that we can never fully grasp the concept of health, hence the wide range of definitions, most people instinctively know what it means to be healthy. Tillich's insistence that health can only be defined in contrast to its opposite, disease, can help direct our understanding. And that's also something that's getting lost in the new paradigm. We don't talk about disease anymore. We talk about health. But disease is real. People all over the world in every culture seek health when pain or disability prevent them from attending to the activities of daily living. What are they hoping to find? At first, they are looking for relief from pain, the ability to function, and restoration of their social environment. Health is primarily physical. Beyond that, people may seek to eliminate the underlying causes of the immediate problem. At this level, the psychological and spiritual dimensions enter into the healthcare spectrum. When our operational definition of health neglects the physical dimension, nurses can justify avoiding the hard and often unpleasant tasks of caring for the body. Things like emptying bedpans, cleaning up incontinent patients, doing the things we really don't like to do. We also eliminate the primary motivation most people have for seeking health care. Pain, nausea, fever, and conditions that limit our ability to work and play drive us to seek help. God created us with bodies. The physical is real. It is not an illusion, as the new paradigm claims. Regardless of how strongly nursing theorists may argue that the biological functions are illusory and can be controlled by the mind, we are still subject to illness and injury. We have only to stub a toe to be convinced. While the mind certainly has a great deal to do with wellness and healing, disease is real. Bacteria and viruses can invade the strongest immune system. Cancer and heart disease afflict the most ardent health enthusiasts. The physical dimension certainly predominates most people's thinking about health. Daniel Callahan suggests that the best definition for health might be a state of physical well-being. However, that definition will not satisfy today's nursing theorists, nor the biblical concept of shalom. Our definition of health must also include the psychosocial and spiritual dimensions. It is here that the new paradigm thought has stepped into the gap left over by our overdependence upon the scientific medical model of healthcare. And Arlene's gone into some of what that involves. The new paradigm holistic healthcare strikes a chord in people who have been conditioned by our modernist culture to expect every physical problem to be fixed. They turn instinctively to alternative therapies when scientific medicine does not work completely, or results in unpleasant side effects, or proves to be exorbitantly expensive. One of the primary drawing points for these alternative therapies is the emphasis they place on touch and spending prolonged time with patients, as well as their appeal to ancient spiritual wisdom. Often these alternative therapies do appear to work. And first of all, they may be conferring actual physical benefits in ways that we're not really able to discover scientifically. Research has shown real benefits of some herbal remedies, acupuncture, and acupressure. It has not been able to demonstrate why they work, but it does suggest that these therapies may cause the body to release endorphins. Some alternative therapies may also bring real physical improvements indirectly through reducing stress and giving hope, love, and a sense of meaning and empowerment. In many cases, people attribute healing to alternative therapies when it is actually due to the body's ability to heal itself. 80% of physical ailments, if left untreated, would eventually resolve themselves without treatment. Some benefits from holistic treatments can be attributed to the placebo effect. Placebo effect has an actual physiologic basis. It causes the body to produce the endorphins, which reduce pain and worry, allowing the immune system to function more effectively. The beneficial effects of emotional support and the communication of caring and concern also aid in healing. If these were the only effects of alternative therapies, we could easily incorporate them into Christian health care. However, there are also problems involved. And the cartoon. Number 6. This is a little cartoon from Rose's Rose, and the little guy's sitting here and he says, "I can't tickle myself." And his guardian angel says, "Nobody can." "I've never been tickled at all." And the little guy says, "Never?" And the angel replies, "When you're one with everything, it's impossible." Now remember Arlene's picture where everything, it's just a big mush? We're congealed energy? When you're one with everything, when you're in that new paradigm, there is no physical dimension. It's an illusion, so you can't tickle yourself. Nobody can be tickled. But there are more important results. Some apparent healings are fraudulent and trick people into thinking they're healed. This can have a devastating effect when the healed person stops taking essential medication or discontinues life-sustaining traditional health care. Furthermore, many holistic alternative therapies turn to occult spiritual beings for their power. Earlier nursing literature tried to cover these pagan influences with scientific language, but more recent articles blatantly advocate Eastern and occult spiritualities. It's fascinating to trace some of these new paradigm theorists. They started out covering it real heavily with research and scientific language. Martha Rogers wrote in language from physics, but she was coming from theosophy. Participating in these activities may well be flirting with the demonic, and we must keep in mind that God has strictly forbidden interactions with the spirit realm. However, all of this demonstrates the importance of considering the spiritual and psychosocial dimensions of our health care. The New Age holistic movement is correct in recognizing that we are integrated beings. Health is much more than a state of physical well-being. But our culture's pursuit of health has gone too far. A Christian view of health must incorporate a realistic understanding of human suffering and mortality and the hope of eternal life. There are other forces at work in this world that we cannot fully control: microorganisms, genetics, environmental pollutants, violence, accidents, and spiritual influences. We are not God. And we have another cartoon on this. I think even as Christians, we fall into this problem. Adam and Eve are standing here looking at the world's first organizational chart, which confuses them. It's God, you, down below. We constantly want to flip it, and we want to put ourselves on the top of the organizational chart, and we'll use God. I got into a real heated argument with our director of Christian education at church because she told me she was using God, and I said, "No, that's backwards." Well, the poor woman was intimidated, and I shouldn't have done it, but that's what we do. We don't use God. God is our creator, redeemer, our Lord, and we obey him. And that's one of the problems with alternative the mentality where we use these therapeutic modalities, we end up using prayer and using God in the process. We will all eventually get sick and die. I'm glad that's been said a number of times, even since we started last night. To view health as shalom means to stand with those who are sick and dying. We don't abandon them because they haven't succeeded. That we, in the process of their dying, encompass them in the fellowship of the Christian community and the presence of God. Shalom doesn't end with death. We just come into the fulfillment of it in death. The Christian then places health within a larger context. It can be radiant health in the midst of terrible physical disability. Conversely, health can be absent in a person with a well-toned body. Health usually shows itself as a state of physical well-being, but ultimately it is shalom, a God-centered wholeness which enables the person to live in harmony with God, self, and the environment. Medical ethicists Stephen Lammers and Alan Verhey assert that the definitions of health turn out to be important because in doing the defining, we must explore the relationship of health to other human goods, the relationship of health and responsibility, both of individuals and of the medical or nursing profession, the relationship of health and those conventional modes of treating and coping with illness. So how does shalom shape our goals for health care? Let's go back to Susan, my radiantly healthy dying friend. As a nurse, I acknowledged the value of expert scientific medical care and dealt with her physical condition. At the same time, as a representative of our congregation, I represented the caring Christian community and worked toward a different kind of health. Together, we worked toward shalom. Health is essentially living according to God's purposes, even in the face of suffering and death. It includes the physical dimension. Therefore, we work toward maintaining optimal physical function and providing comfort measures. However, complete health also means living in harmonious relationship with God, our neighbors, and therefore, nursing also includes assisting patients with establishing and maintaining a relationship with God through Jesus Christ, as well as facilitating healing relationships among people. It is the work of the whole church and not just the healthcare professions. Okay, we have a parting shot here. We may be experiencing shalom now, but the ultimate fulfillment will be with the second coming. And this says, don't push your luck. There's the lion and the lamb. Okay, we would like to open it up for questions. And Arlene, do you want to come back up too? So if you want to question Arlene too, we have about 8 minutes that we can answer questions. Yeah, Pauline. Yeah, can you stand up and speak loud? I guess there's some microphones you need to move toward. There's one over here, and yeah. Why don't you, if you have questions, would you line up at the mics and then we will. No, they're recording it, so.
Well, this is a combination of a question and observation. If you could put up your definition of health up there again, because your illustration was so clear in terms of the fact that we may have a disease process going on doesn't mean that we are unhealthy. And I think that's something that I struggle with all the time. And when I looked at your definition that it incorporates all the elements in a God-centered community, that implies sometimes that, you know, if you do have a disease process, you're not healthy in some way. And that's not what you were saying in your presentation or with your illustration, and I wondered if you'd just comment on that, because if I were to read this without the illustration, I may be thinking of that other definition also that Callahan uses.
Okay. Yeah, I think we function under this modernist understanding of health. And because of that, we separate the spiritual and the physical. I don't know how many Christian nurses I've heard say, well, spiritual care is fine, but I can't do it in my institution because it's against the rules. Now, I've worked in institutions where that was the case, and it was very interesting because I didn't know it was the case until I became a chaplain student in the same institution. And the first thing the chaplain handed me was the rules. And one was that only the chaplain's department could hand out religious literature or pray with patients or discuss spiritual things with patients. I said, I've been doing this for 2 years as a nurse. I guess I better quit. And I was doing that just to push his buttons. And he said, oh no, that's not for you. That's only for the Jehovah's Witnesses so that they come in and abuse their privileges. Now, in that case, they were very supportive of nurses doing good spiritual care, which included the whole person. That illness, you can't bring a person into health without that spiritual dimension. Now, we had another situation with a woman in our Nurses Christian Fellowship group in my area, in our local hospital. She was called on the carpet by the hospital administrator because he had received a letter from a very grateful patient who said, the nursing care was so excellent at this hospital, my nurse even prayed for me. He traced it down and found out who it was and told her, don't you ever do that again. Our group began to pray for Margot and for the hospital that things would turn around. Would you believe in 6 months they had Granger Westberg there to do a workshop on parish nursing and realized that spiritual care is really important and we should really encourage our nurses to do this. And this is a community hospital, but they were encouraging it to be done from a Christian perspective, recognizing that most of the patients were Christians.
Could I just add a little bit more to the point of the question? Part of the concern, I think, was that this might give an idea that it would be complete. You'd have to be completely healthy in order to be healthy. And one of the, we didn't talk about Karl Barth's definition, which fits with this, actually, that health is the power to be human. And what he meant was that it's just a power to live a human life. And that in a fallen world, human life includes illness. And that what then a health means is that it includes then the ability, and I think this isn't just individualistic, sometimes we usually need the support of other people to help us when we're really sick and feeling like we want to die, and many people do when they're ill. But it's that power to sustain and to get through that, and that power also is health. So it kind of includes this ability to cope with the realities of living in a fallen world.
Yeah, I think the problem is none of us is ever completely healthy in all of our dimensions at the same time. We have, health is a continuum. And probably the only time that we're going to really be healthy is when we get to heaven.
That's another question.
I have often wondered if the nursing diagnoses that many of us have to teach and work under with the innocuous diagnosis, spiritual distress, if as Christians we could not take and incorporate a model for the Christian, maybe for the other pluralistic religious groups that we serve, if this would not give us more freedom. It looks as though it would be a challenge for Christian organizations such as what we have represented here in the area of caring to design an accepted nursing diagnoses which could be incorporated into texts which would identify the true believer if they wanted to be identified. Therefore, I could go pull that nursing diagnosis, attach it to the chart. This is an accepted, and then deliver my ministry along with the field of caring with a recognition that this is an approved method of spiritual ministry.
Okay, that, interestingly, the Parish Nurse Resource Center is working toward coming up with some faith-based nursing diagnoses. But the problem is, even there, they're trying to work with a pluralistic community. And Becky, would I embarrass you if I asked you to come to the mic and share a little of the history of that diagnosis? Becky was involved from the very beginning of developing that nursing diagnosis.
Yes, back in, I forget what year that was, I was reading the American Journal of Nursing, and the nursing diagnosis list had been published, and right at the top was alterations in faith. And I thought, wow, they think this is so important, it's first, but it was an alphabetical list. But that challenged me to get involved. I thought, boy, this is an open door we can't pass up. Because up to that point in time in nursing, there were two things you didn't talk about with patients, and that was religion and politics. And I thought, this is at least our open door to be able to start giving spiritual care in an open way. And so I got involved, had an opportunity to be involved in a regional conference with development of nursing diagnosis in San Francisco. And from there, then we took that work. Judy Van Hukelum still did, she was with Nurses Christian Fellowship at the time, and she had done some work with this nursing diagnosis, spiritual, what has ended up becoming spiritual distress. And
we're gonna have to stop.
Okay.
But let's continue this. We're going for, after the break, there's a Nurses Parallel session for nurses specifically and it'll be totally a discussion. So Becky, will you be there? Could you continue on that?
Sure.
Okay, and we'll continue to hash out some of the implications in that session. And Patricia Benner has agreed to be there too, so she can help us to think some of this through. Thank you for asking the question.